Hello dear friends, welcome to our presentation on the occasion of Pride Month 2024. The film that I would like to bring to you this year is special in many ways. Not only is it a very early work that attempts to deal with the topic of gender identity, the time and place of its creation, equipment, direction, acting staff and much more are also worth noting. I'm talking about Glen or Glenda, which was published in 1953 in America, which was quite prudish at the time. Filming time was an absurdly short 3 days. Director, script and leading role, Edward D. Wood Jr., or Ed Wood for short, the undisputed king of trashy cinema entertainment. Films like Ride of the Monster or Plan 9 from Outer Space are not easily forgotten, especially since the latter held the title of Worst Film of All Time for decades. He copied this from Glen or Glenda, which was published 6 years earlier. So you can guess which direction things will go today. Overall, the dialogues are rather thin, which gives us the opportunity to shed some light on some interesting backgrounds.
I'm afraid I'd lose you.
Nothing could be as bad as all that. I love you and you love me. And nothing in the world can change that.
I hope not. I really hope not.
Glen, is it another woman?
Before we get into the plot, which genre can the work best be classified into? Well, it's a surreal docudrama with horror elements. Only Ed Wood can add an appeal for tolerance and a supposedly enlightening character here. We are first greeted by Dracula himself. The Hungarian actor Bela Lugosi, celebrated horror film legend of the 30s and 40s, plays a diabolical-seeming scientist who acts as the overarching narrator. However, his statements are in no way crucial to the plot, and we are guided through the story by another person who we will get to know shortly.
Brings to light many startling things. Startling because they seem new, sudden. But most are not new. The signs of the ages.
Surrounded by everything you could find in Frankenstein's laboratory, Lugosi is completely in his element. Director Wood greatly admired the actor and at the same time hoped his name would gain traction for his films. He cast him several times in roles similar to those at the peak of his career and which Wood liked best. There was also an opportunity for the aged Lugosi. Dracula's star had fallen low by the mid-1950s. His years of alcohol and drug addiction had left their mark and made working with him extremely difficult. At least he was able to negotiate a fee of $1,000 for his participation here. Change of scene. Patrick or Patricia has taken his own life. The arriving police, led by Inspector Warren, find a suicide note and the unfortunate man tells us something about his motives off camera.
Let me see that note.
The records will tell the story. I was put in jail recently. Why? Because I, a man, was caught on the street wearing women's clothing. This was my 4th arrest for the same act.
Patrick was a transvestite, a man who consciously chose to wear the clothing of the opposite sex. A little at a loss as to how such tragedies can be prevented in the future and at the same time eager to learn, Warren turns to psychiatrist Dr. Alton. He is the actual narrator of the following events.
Inspector, doctor, sit down. Thank you. You're a very busy man, Dr. Alton, I know. I appreciate this time you're giving me.
Business or pleasure, Inspector?
In a way, business. From policeman to inspector. 20 years of it. I guess I've seen everything there is for a policeman to see. Yet I wonder if we ever stop learning. Learning about which we see. Trying to learn more about an ounce of prevention.
Stock footage scenes show us the achievements of the modern world, and again a newspaper in which we can read about a sensational gender reassignment operation. And that brings us to the main crux of the entire film. It's all kind of lumped together. Gender dysphoria, transvestism, transvestite fetishism and intersexuality. Whether due to carelessness, a lack of scientific knowledge, or on purpose, we are leaving this question unanswered for now. Here we see Glen, or Glenda, the central character of the rest of the plot, portrayed by the director himself under the pseudonym Daniel Davis. How did this come about? Well, quite simply, Ed Wood was a transvestite himself, or rather had a transvestite fetish, with a penchant for very particular items of clothing, which we'll get to later. Despite the courageous step of conveying his heartfelt affair himself, at this point it is again a mixture of two pairs of shoes.
The term transvestite is the name given by medical science to those persons who wear the clothing of the opposite sex. Many a transvestite actually wishes to be the opposite sex.
Incidentally, Glen has a very pretty girlfriend named Barbara, whom he also plans to marry soon. She is played by Wood's then partner Dolores Fuller. The film attaches great importance to making it clear, and rightly so, that transvestite men do not necessarily have to be gay, but sometimes also lead a completely normal heterosexual life. Homosexuality is actually treated rather criminally in Wood's appeal for tolerance. In 1982, a revised version of the work was published, incorporating 6 minutes of previously unseen material. This shows Glen rejecting a man's advances. After a series of trivial male and female stereotypes, we take things up a notch and travel to wild natives and their animalistic instincts. Then witness Glen's inner turmoil, the roots of which can be found in his past. The Halloween festival gave him the opportunity to express himself in his sister's dress. At some point, however, this one day a year was no longer enough for him and things happened as they had to. He was caught by his sister during his supposedly sinful activities. Incidentally, Glen's sister Sheila is played by Evelyn Wood, who was also the cult director's sister in reality. In the film, there was a break with the family.
That's the understatement of the year. Just how does one go about introducing your friends to your brother, when brother's wearing your best sweater and your skirt and makeup to boot?
Back in the present, the special item of clothing mentioned above becomes the object of Glen's desire. A sweater made of Angora wool. But the material exerted a strange fascination not only on his role, but also on Wood. The house of cards slowly begins to shake.
Glen's problem is a deep one, but he must tell her soon. She's begun to notice things. His nails, his eyes when he looks into a ladies' store window. So many of the little things that are hard to hide. Soon she will realize.
The image of Lugosi superimposed on a herd of bison simply makes no sense at this point.
Hold the string! Hold the string! A mistake's made.
When buying underwear, which is of course a surprise for Barbara, Glen's secret double life threatens to be exposed, although his courage certainly deserves respect here.
Perhaps he admires the material too long.
You can see how sheer this material really is.
Yes.
You see, it's all pure nylon and only $21.95. And of course, it will never snag.
For advice, he turns to a friend who shares his passions and knows about Glen and Glenda. He urgently appeals to him to clear the air before the upcoming wedding and reports what lies and silence have done to his marriage. Glen seems more and more driven. He remembers the day of his engagement, which gives us the opportunity to talk a little about Wood's relationship with Dolores Fuller. Well, art imitates life. Fuller was just as clueless as her character Barbara. The exact plot of the film was not explained to her, and Wood avoided walking around the set in women's clothing outside of his performances as Glenda, which he occasionally did. Only when she saw the finished work did the connections become clear to her. She felt humiliated and could not tolerate Wood's inclinations. Less than 2 years later, the relationship finally broke down. Does Glen feel the same way about Barbara? Who knows? Lugosi first prepares us for visions of horror.
Beware. Beware. Beware of the big green dragon that sits on your doorstep.
Such a marriage, built on lies and self-denial, is the devil's. And the woman beckons forever. This sentence makes a very special sense in Glen's case. His inner woman is probably trying to break out. The following soft eroticism, bondage and SM performances cannot be interpreted any differently. Don't you agree? No, the explanation is much more banal. George Weiss, producer of this and other B&C movies, had the scenes added later and edited together with Wood's and Lugosi's reactions. to stretch the film. Here we see him in the middle, on the set of Glen or Glenda. In the end, the canvas work was simply too short. In other places, stock footage was also used or would reshot scenes in order to at least get a running time of almost 70 minutes. A moral rascal shouldn't be missing either. Overall, the film was only able to receive release because it had already been sold to several cinemas in advance. Despite the attempt, Glenda cannot be suppressed in the long term. In his mind's eye, the unhappy person sees the people of his past, but also of his present, who judge him and mock him. He knows that he can only find peace if he has the courage to rise up and accept his feminine side as part of himself. Finally, he takes courage and pours Barbara pure wine. She is initially shocked, but then decides to stay with her future husband.
I don't fully understand this, but maybe together we can work it out.
As a conciliatory gesture, she even gives him the long-awaited sweater. At least in this version it is like that. Wood twisted the ending of the story in two different ways. The far less edifying one has been preserved in an American cinema trailer. There isn't much to be seen of understanding or even acceptance. The original aim was probably to use harsher tones throughout the film. After Patrick and Glen, we take a quick look at the life of Alan, who has been a little different from his peers since he was a child. When the USA entered World War II in 1941, he began military service. However, he secretly pursued his passions during basic training and even after embarking into the war zone. He also preferred a life in the form of the opposite sex. However, the situation was different for him. After the war ended, Alan underwent hormone treatment and gender reassignment surgery. Alan became Anne. She is the woman who was repeatedly mentioned in the newspaper during the course of the plot. This episode is based on a true story. In 1952, a year before the film was released, Christine Jorgensen's assimilation caused a sensation and brought transgender people into the focus of the general public for the first time. Jorgensen was asked to appear in the film but declined. Her story prompted the previously mentioned producer Weiss to set up a film project on this topic. Ed Wood, a transvestite himself, felt called upon to implement it and was awarded the contract. But he was a transvestite and not dysphoric. And this also answers the question posed at the beginning of why so many things ended up in one pot. Too many cooks, too many different approaches and too many ideas at once. Often just sell the broth. Added to this is Wood's already unusual style of depicting a situation visually. Perhaps Lugosi's function in this strange spectacle becomes clear at this point. How Alan comes before him and lives on as Anne after receiving absolution. One could interpret the Hungarian's role as a guide of humanity or destiny. For Wood, he perhaps even represented the embodiment of God. With this slight confusion, we go to Dr. Alton one last time. We hear from him that Anne probably didn't suffer from dysphoria in the classic sense, but was intersexual.
It had been found that Alan was really a pseudo-hermaphrodite. A hermaphrodite is one who has the organs of both the male and female in plain sight. A pseudo-hermaphrodite is one who has one perfectly formed organ of either sex and one imperfectly formed one that's difficult to detect. Alan was of the latter.
However, Alton's therapy recommendation for Glen tops it all off.
For your happy ending, it's the only way.
Then you think I can kill this second character by transferring her qualities to Barbara?
Exactly. But as the author and his character, the elements must be right. It's up to you, Barbara. You must take the place, give the love, and accept the facts that Glenda has always accepted.
As if Glenda were a demon that could be transferred from one person to another, like in The Exorcist. Well, I don't have much left other than to advise you. Get informed. Thoroughly. Comprehensively. From the contact points whose arguments are based on the latest medical data and natural and social scientific findings. Then nothing stands in the way of nostalgic enjoyment, like with Glen or Glenda, without you running the risk of misclassifying what is being shown. The film reveals one thing above all: the misconceptions about gender identity that prevailed then, as they still do today.